Here.
Stephen Catalano.
Here.
Mark Conroy.
Here.
Louise Gibbons.
Here.
And for the first time, Superintendent Bob Maloney.
Yeah.
Welcome. We have no teacher or student reps here today, so we'll go right into our action items. We have consideration to approve the 11-17 school committee meeting minutes.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Catalano.
I make a motion to approve the November 17th, 2020 school committee meeting minutes. I'm sorry, November 20th.
Second. Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. We're going to go right into the superintendent report. So for winter sports, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few updates on winter sports. Hockey and basketball have been approved by the MIA as well as the EEA. And tryouts will begin on December 14th. Games will begin sometime around January 6th, January 8th, depending on whether it's hockey or basketball. And there hasn't been a fan policy determined yet. That will be worked out probably the first week of January. Indoor track is still up in the air because Reggie Lewis is not available to high school teams, so there's talk of pushing that to the wedge season. But some schools, including schools in the Tri-Valley, might have access to another facility, like a week college. So they're still discussing whether those schools that have the opportunity could have winter track and not have it moved to fall two. Gymnastics will be, we'll have 3 girls competing in our co-op program with Medway. And gymnastics will be done virtually, so the judges, the students will perform at their facility and judge, zoom in and judge the meets. Alpine ski has been approved, and we'll have 5 competitors in the Ski Central League at Ward Hill and Shrewsbury. Same starting dates and trial dates as basketball and hockey. And we're just hopeful that we're able to have a winter season that was as successful as our fall season.
Great.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Conroy.
One question on that, and actually it just came up as I was walking down here, because with Metro West also couldn't use the gym. That season starts the first weekend in January. So I know if we're not going to get capacity or fans for high school kind of to that week, can we look at, coordinate with them, look at what our presuming 6 feet distance on the bleachers opposite where the teams would sit,
Right.
how many that would hold? I mean, we'll
Yeah.
probably,
In fact, Coach Grant was doing that today after
Okay.
school. So.
just so, because we may need to coordinate with Metro West as to if they're going to be allowed to have fans for Metro West games on Sundays
Right.
before we have a final decision for high school stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then I guess I just ask one other question. Before we get as a Tri-Valley and as we, for a high school, determine what our capacity is, I think there were kind of guidelines and protocols that were established for soccer that, specifically soccer, that at the time we were told were in excess of what absolutely had to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were many instances where the letter of the protocol was not followed.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just ask that whatever protocols are designed for the winter sports, and especially basketball because it's inside,
Right.
that they're adhered to strictly 100% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes frustrating, I'll just speak for myself, when we as a committee approve something under a set of assumptions and then see those things not executed. Again, to be perfectly honest, the amount of space and capacity we have outside at the soccer field, it wasn't ever a space issue. It's more, if we say we're going to do something, we should do it.
And I think obviously in the gym, the capacity is certainly much more.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions or comments on sports? Okay, we will move down to the chairman's report. We will start our discussion on the Millis mascot, and we have some people here that would like to speak, so I'm going to invite the group from Retire the Mascot up.
Oh, yeah.
6 feet.
All right, are we in? Excellent. All righty, thank you guys so much. I'm going to let Eva go ahead and take it away, but thank you so much for having us.
Hi, I'm Eva Fabian. I'm a sophomore at Millis High School. I'm also a part of the Retired the Millis Mascot Committee. I'm doing this because I think it is wrong to use races as mascots. It has a negative effect on Native people. Personally, I know people who've been impacted. I want to thank the committee and everyone who has joined us. I want to thank the community for getting involved in this process and voicing their opinion. And the purpose of our presentation is to begin a conversation and hopefully sign into policy. Sign into policy the promise to remove the Millis mascot and replace it with a non-race-based mascot. We have a robust presentation prepared, but we also know you'd like to get home tonight. I'm going to run through the important slides briefly, and then we would be happy to take questions.
Alrighty, and as I think some of you know, my name is Rebecca Coles. I not too long ago started a petition that started some chaos, and I'm just really happy to be here, and I know you guys have been doing a really great job with COVID and handling the school in general, so this is an especially difficult thing to talk about right now, but I think it's really important, and I'm really glad we're here talking about it. So, on our brief agenda, you all received this PowerPoint along with our proposal in your email, so you should all have a PDF version of both of these items, as well as some student letters and other student support, and as well as the petition. But we're going to run through our PowerPoint as quickly as we can. So, the first thing is our call to action, which is our proposal. And we have some immediate requests for the school committee. The first being the immediate retirement of the current Millis mascot, the Mohawk. That would be in full, that would be the name, that would be the logo, that would be the entire thing. Our second ask is that we replace that Millis Mohawk mascot with an appropriate and non-race-based mascot. Something that the whole school can stand behind, something that you guys, we'd ask that you have the responsibility of putting up there and determining and deciding how the school goes about electing that. And finally, we want to work towards a zero tolerance policy around the Millis Mohawk. That would include the display of any new gear, the sale of any new gear, jerseys, like I said, the word Mohawk in general, zero tolerance around any use of it. We understand that there are historic elements within the building that say Mohawk on it, and things like banners we wouldn't expect would change over. Things like the basketball court, we would. There would be, there'd have to be a discussion here as to what is a historic piece and what is a current representation of the school. Long-term on our proposal, you'll see kind of a list of items where we would just want this committee to embrace change where it is reflectant of anti-racism curriculum and other things, especially in gear of Native American history. We would love to see the adoption of different classes, of collaboration, of people within this community, within this school. That's in our proposal, but there's nothing, resolute within those lines. I'm going to pass it back to Eva, but before I do, I just want to say we also should thank all the schools around the community that have helped with this presentation specifically. Schools from Massachusetts, New York, it's been really great. And so I'll hand it back to Eva.
Okay, so we have a couple slides in relation to direct research regarding this topic, some from the American Psychological Association, American Teachers Association, Yale, University of Kansas, and the NCAI. We won't specifically go through them, but the data shows and the research proves that these mascots are harmful to Native and non-Native students. They create hostile learning environments, they promote negative stereotypes of Native people, and they allow a space for students and teachers to misunderstand and misinterpret very real people and cultures. We have this slide that shows school committee policies that directly tie to our movement. It can simply be stated that these values are misaligned with the current Millis mascot.
Yeah, and I'm just going to kind of jump off that. I would say if you read through these statements, it's really clear that there's a value of this school that is non-discrimination and is embracing everyone and embracing cultures. I mean, there's lines in these statements that say very specifically, we want our students to embrace a diversity of culture, respect it, know how to honor it, and also know how to talk about it. And Eva is kind of our shining star in that respect here. She's here tonight talking about something that's really difficult for a community to talk about. And so with these policies in mind, I think that should really be in the forefront of how does a mascot represent the school and the values of the school, and how do we change that to reflect the real values of our school and of our athletes. Now to the counter arguments. Hopefully I don't have to spend too much time on these ones, but firstly, there's a quote on here from Corinne Rice, who is a very influential Native speaker. She has talked in specific to our cause, and put up this quote that people minimize the fight to end mascots because they think there are bigger issues, but the root of all those bigger issues, like missing and murdered Indigenous women and other forms of oppression, stem from the dehumanization of our people. That includes mascots. This is said over and over and over again by Native people. It's been said for 50 years. She is one person, but she speaks at Google, at Walmart, at Gucci. She's a writer for the AJ, for the HuffPost. She's incredible. She has thousands of followers on Instagram. She took the time to talk to us about our campaign. She is a Mohawk. We are not Mohawk. And she and many others agree that this needs to end. So, on to counter arguments. Counter argument number 1, Native mascots honor Native people. It doesn't matter at the end of the day whether your intent was to honor. The impact, based on the data and the research, is that it does not honor. It is disrespectful, it is offensive, and for 50 years there has been a strike to end Native mascots. When we think about the ways we acknowledge and respect real people and people of our community, we educate each other about them, we pay respect to their tradition, their cultures. Putting up a mascot that has a red face and a bunch of feathers in his hair is not respect when we don't teach our students what Native Americans are and who they are and what land we're on and whose people we're disrespecting. It's just simply not the same. So this, I mean, it goes into depth. You've had the NCAI email you. You know what those all stand for. I won't spend too much time. The next one, Natives support Native mascots. Really quickly, there was an NFL poll that said that that Natives overwhelmingly support Native mascots, specifically the Washington, D.C. mascot. This was a really bad study. In brief, it was like 100 people who went to games who weren't Natives that grew up on reservations, and they said, yeah, sure, we don't care about it. But when a reliable group from UC Berkeley did the same study with more people, with a bigger population size, and actually asked people that lived on reservations who had traditions and cultures in Native American culture, more than 50% of them said this is absolutely offensive, 100% offensive. This is absolutely ridiculous. So it just to show that. Lastly, you are erasing history. This is probably the biggest one for this school. This mascot has been here for a long time. And like we said in our proposal, we are not trying to erase history. We are trying to rewrite it for generations like Eva's, for those who come after her and those who came before her. I've had so many alumni reach out to me and say that when they leave this school, they have to wear the badge of dishonor that their school had a Native American mascot. I had to untag myself from pictures in this basketball court because I would not be hired if they saw me on a basketball court with the Native American face. And I looked the same way I did 4 years ago, so they would have thought it was 2 days ago. But the important thing is to understand whose history we're impacting. We're not changing our history. Our athletes are still star athletes. Our students are still star students. We care about this school so much, and we get to say that we had this conversation and we changed the Mohawk, we changed the mascot, and our students are better for it, and our community is better for it. So I think it's really important to understand what history means and what culture and tradition mean when we're talking about a mascot. Back to Eva.
So I think it's most important to say this is a national movement. There are over 1,500 Native organizations, including federally recognized tribal nations, that have signed a letter to the NFL condemning the Washington team and any other Native mascots in use today. We've received over 3,000 signatures on our petition. The committee has reviewed many emails, phone calls, and voices regarding this petition. And overwhelmingly, Native communities are still asking for the removal of Native mascots, as they have been for over 50 years. The committee has reviewed this matter many times before, but with the emphasis on Black Lives Matter and adopting anti-racist material in classes. We believe this is the time to make the change official. We have so many other resources and so many documents if anyone needs more reading.
Awesome. We would love to take any questions that anyone might have.
Before I open up for questions, let me just let you talk a little bit about the process that we need to go through. So this is, I think, the first step in a good conversation, right? So we're at the point where we're starting the conversation on where we should go in Millis and with this. We're listening to you, and we have your input. We also have Mr. Fallon that also has asked to speak to, and I think, because it's a larger community discussion point too, that we need to, after tonight, it's our intent to kind of take a step back and say, okay, what's the next steps and how do we move this forward? What's the right process to move this through? So I just want to make sure that we set expectations of where it would be great if we could say today, this is what we're going to do. There's process that we have to go through, and we have to make sure that we are checking all the boxes and following the right process. And to be honest, this is kind of new for all of us, and we're not quite sure what that process is. So we're kind of looking into that and doing our own research and trying to figure out what the next steps are to make sure that this is an inclusive decision from the students, the community, and all of the stakeholders. So I just wanted to let you know what our thoughts were on the process going forward.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
I think we just wanted to make sure that we were clear about where we started standing.
Of course.
But we weren't sure the process either. So we prepared the presentation just to give you a robust understanding of what we're doing, but we are more than happy to continue that conversation and be a part of it. And I'm in Millis for a while, so I'm ready to chat.
Yes. Thank you for making that long drive. So I don't know how we want to do. Do we want to hear from Mr. Fallon and then kind of ask questions, or do you guys have questions for these guys now, or what does the committee think?
Let's hear from Mr. Fallon.
Okay. So why don't we let Mr. Fallon come up, and then you guys are here, and then afterwards we can open it up for questions. Thank you. That was very well done.
Yeah,
Thank you.
nice job.
Good evening, everyone.
Hello.
How are you?
It's nice to hear. Excellent job from 2 alums and a current student. I think it's really impressive that you guys have taken this on. As I'm sure you might have figured out, I'm going to present tonight the counter argument. I've prepared a statement which I'd like to read just so I don't mess up, and I'm thorough. And I will apologize in advance. I've been practicing how to say some names, but if I make a mistake, I'll try to fix that in terms of an indigenous name. Good evening. My name is Dave Fallon, and I've been a social studies teacher here at Millis High School for the last 18 years. As a social studies teacher, I've always enjoyed learning and teaching my students about indigenous people. In fact, my curriculum in AP US History spans from the time period of pre-Columbian civilizations to the modern-day issues facing indigenous people. I teach my students, among other things, the consequences of the earliest arrival of European powers, the rising colonial pressure applied to indigenous groups, the development of Indian boarding schools, and the creation of the horrific Dawes Act of 1887. Yet, speaking honestly, my knowledge of the Mohawks was quite limited before I became aware a few months ago of the debate surrounding our school mascot. As I listened to the debate I quickly began my own research in an effort to educate myself on this topic. I read several books on the Mohawks and found many other online resources. Almost immediately, I became fascinated with what I was learning. Among all the Native American tribes, the Iroquois peoples are some of the most well-documented Native Americans in history, yet perhaps the most misrepresented. Indigenous to the northeast region of what is now the United States and parts of Canada, they were among some of the earliest contacts Europeans had with Native tribes. The Iroquois Confederation, which we used as inspiration for our own constitution and national government, was made up of several different tribal nations that include the Seneca, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, Tuscarora, and the Mohawk. Among these groups, the most famous, though, is the Mohawk, who refer to themselves as Ganinkehaka, people of the place of flint. Those unfamiliar with the group associate them with the conspicuous Mohawk haircut, which should really be associated more to the Pawnee, and images of warlike people who scalp their enemies. These misconceptions paint a false narrative that continues to harm the generations of today. The real accomplishments of the Ganinkehaka are incredible. As the easternmost Iroquois tribe, they were the protectors of the eastern wall, making themselves most vulnerable to defending themselves and all the other Iroquois tribes against European aggression. They bravely maintained this position for centuries. Mohawk society was, and still is, based on egalitarian rights between men and women. In fact, the clan systems they developed were matrilineal, and it was women that chose their leaders and held the power to impeach them. Furthermore, the Great Law of Peace, established by the Iroquois Confederation, guaranteed freedom of religion and expression and other rights later once again embraced in our very own U.S. Constitution. The Great Law even said the national government should have a commander-in-chief, and that person should present a State of the Union addressed to the nation. The Mohawks also became known for their beautifully constructed longhouses, Three Sisters farming methods, the wampum belts, basket making, and even their contributions to the game of lacrosse. By the late 19th century, many became employed as iron workers in the construction of bridges and buildings. This practice continued throughout the 20th century. In fact, much of today's Manhattan skyline was built by Mohawk iron workers. I also discovered that while the Mohawks lived mostly in New York and Canada, there are several Massachusetts connections that are interesting to note. During King Philip's War, King Philip reached out to the Mohawks for support in their war against the English. The Mohawks were also involved in the historic Deerfield Raid of 1704. Lastly, there's a historic Mohawk Trail in western Massachusetts that today is part of Route 2/2A. This trail began as a Native American trade route, which connected Atlantic tribes with tribes in upstate New York, including the Mohawks. The more I read, the more I realized what we have in front of us. I do believe that we should immediately get rid of images in our school that depict Native Americans in a stereotypical manner. For example, the image that's on the center of our gym floor. These characters are harmful and perpetuate negative stereotypes of America's first peoples and contribute to a disregard for the personhood of Native peoples. But I also believe that we have an incredible teaching opportunity in front of us. My goal is to help create curriculum materials for our school that speaks to teaching students about the Mohawks, then and now. The curriculum that I've started to design is not only easily accessible, but can fit so nicely into our school culture and larger community. I can imagine interdisciplinary projects, longhouse building, the learning of the Mohawk language, wampum belt projects, bringing in speakers from various Ganinkehaka communities, site visits, and even the creation of a student-led Mohawk council. The goal is not to keep the Mohawk name because we've always had it, but because we've always had it, but have failed to teach our school and community about these incredible people. Teaching our students would be a pathway to not only preserve the rich history, but also build cultural empathy beyond their formative high school years. The next generation of students will finally begin to graduate from our school system, truly knowing what it means to be a Mohawk. My next step, of course, was to reach out to the Mohawk community. Would they be comfortable with my proposal? What were their thoughts on this controversy? Mohawk Nation today consists of 6 different reserves within both the U.S. and Canada. I contacted the 2 largest reserves, the Kanawake Reserve, which is just south of Montreal, and the Akwesasne Reserve, which straddles the borders of both the U.S. and Canada on the banks of the St. Lawrence River. My conversations with both reserves were impactful. It should be noted that the first thing both groups said was that they appreciated being contacted and asked these questions. They desperately want to be part of this conversation that is happening nationally. The Kanawake Reserve, population of roughly 8,000, has been under the leadership of Grand Chief Joseph Norton. Norton is perhaps one of the most important and historically significant people within recent Mohawk history. Norton led his community for more than 3 decades, helping oversee that the Kanawake Reserve maintained its political and economic autonomy by working with both U.S. and Canadian officials. At the same time, he helped continue to preserve the incredible history and culture of the Mohawk. He was one of the few remaining fluent speakers of the Mohawk language, and in 2002, he was awarded the National Aboriginal Achievement Award for Public Service. My conversation with Grand Chief Joseph was powerful. He loved the ideas that I presented and told me that as long as I committed to doing things the right way, he would support my efforts. Unfortunately, Chief Joseph unexpectedly passed away in August, weeks after our discussion. Despite his passing, his niece Brandy Maloche reached out to me to express how excited he was about the opportunity to create this relationship. She wrote, "The Grand Chief enjoyed his conversation with you, and he would want us to continue the work you started with him. Please keep in touch, and we will assist in accomplishing what you have set out to do." I also had an amazing conversation with Chief Caroline Francis and Chelsea Francis of the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne. The Akwesasne Reserve has roughly 14,000 inhabitants. They provided me with ideas for resources that I could use moving forward, and also discussed the idea of potentially one day bringing students to the reserve. They also proposed the idea of students one day sleeping in a longhouse on their reserve. Chief Francis and Chelsea believed that if this was done correctly, it could be a relationship that would have significant value for generations to come. In all of my research and conversations, there are many things that truly impacted me. But perhaps my last conversation with both Chief Francis and Chelsea Francis was the most meaningful. As I discussed the task of maintaining the historical integrity of the Mohawk past, they both reminded me of the need to always connect the past and present. They both uttered the phrase, "We are still here." Many think of Indigenous people as people from a distant past. Even today, our understanding of the history and culture of Indigenous peoples too often is derived from culturally biased and inaccurate texts. But history, true history, is not a dead subject. Historical interpretation of past and present events demands various diverse sources that can offer students multiple perspectives. My job is to help lead those students to those sources. We have the opportunity to connect our students with both past and present with 2 reserves that are both willing and able to help us. Once again, I think we have an amazing opportunity in front of us. For too long, Indigenous people have been told where to go and how to act. And while I appreciate the respect the work of organizations like the National Congress of American Indians and the scholarly work of professors at institutions of higher learning, I also think we need to listen to the Kanikahaka people themselves. They are very open to the ideas that I presented here tonight. There are hundreds of federally recognized Native nations today. Compressing them all into a single warrior caricature means real Native people are being ignored. We are not the Indians, the Redmen, the Warriors, the Red Raiders, or the Tomahawks. We are the Mohawks, Kanikahaka, a specific tribe that has long and incredible history, and they are still here. It is time we truly recognize that and began to teach our students and community about what that means. The easy choice is to change our nickname. The more difficult one, and the one that has more long-term value, is to begin this transformation, here and now. Thank you. If you have any questions, I certainly could answer unless you want to wait.
No, thank you. So my question, so the two tribes that you reached out to are supportive and willing to help you create a program around the Mohawks and their history.
That is correct.
Okay.
One of the things I learned the more I talked to different reserves is that they all don't believe the same thing. I contacted two out of the largest ones, and they both were very receptive, and they said they could offer resources, and they've done this with other schools before. This isn't the first time that they've kind of gone down this road, and we're very open to it.
And the common thread, I think, between what you said and what the ladies presented was the around the Native American imagery being offensive, and that's the first step that we should look at if we're to move down this road.
Yeah, in complete agreement, absolutely.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee for Mr. Fallon?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Conrad.
It's in terms of incorporating I guess, our ability to incorporate the curriculum in. So I know, we've got to follow, state guidelines. So how easy or difficult do we think, and Bob can chime in too, either one of both of you, on actually making this and fitting it into the curriculum that we currently have?
Yeah, to me, it's not like an issue of trying to force curriculum in. It fits so naturally. As a social studies teacher, as I tried to, everything that they've created, the Iroquois Confederation links to our government. So within any political class or any U.S. history class, the links are there. In terms of Native American history, that starts at the early stages at the elementary level. And I've even found resources which I have passed on to some of the teachers at Clyde Brown that I felt were great and accessible for students that age. And then I also think there's projects that would link some of our departments within the school. A wampum belt project could incorporate, obviously, the art department so well, or the creation of maybe a community Mohawk trail, which could be more of a community event. And I think the key is also having students be part of a Mohawk council so that they will truly be immersed in this. And I'm certainly going to be a leader of it, but I imagine this will also be something that students will be heavily involved in.
So is it safe to say if this is the path that we choose to go down, this needs to be a district commitment, not just a high school commitment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a community, it's a community commitment. What I told to the people I spoke to is that I'm not looking for can I have your endorsement? I'm looking to create something that's going to be here long after I'm gone. I want something for the community that lasts, that people can be proud of the connection that we made with the Mohawks.
Is there some? So I'm just again we're kind of not making up this process, but this is a new process for us.
Sure.
So again, if we were to explore this path, and you might not know the answer to this, but what types of I don't know if we're going to call them checks and balances, but how do we check in to make sure that as a district we're fulfilling the commitments that we're saying that we're going to do as far as...
Yeah, I think that's huge.
Yeah.
I don't think, for example, we've, both places talked about site visits. I don't think we deserve those type of activities until we've proven that we've actually done some work here, that we've created a culture here that I think they would be proud of. And then I think that opens up other things outside of here, including perhaps site visits. But I think it's going to take some work, which I see, a senior has already approached me for a senior project, wanting to be behind this Mohawk Council. I just see this as something that progressively could get better and better each year, but it's not going to happen overnight, that's for sure. But, you have my commitment, I can guarantee you, for as long as I'm here, I will give you everything I have towards this.
Any other questions?
I do. First of all, Mr. Hom, thank you so much. I know that people online probably can't hear me, but you might need to repeat my question. So I guess the translation of Mohawk, I will not try to say it right now, does translate to people of the Flint, but Mohawk specifically had its own translation for people eaters and savages, which has been reclaimed by the Mohawk people, and they use the word Mohawk to describe themselves. claimed by the group that had them, but not in use for people who are not actually them, who are not Mohawk.
Yeah, I'll just, Rebecca's question is about the actual name Mohawk and whether that should have a positive or negative connotation in terms of modern day context, because things are pretty fluid in terms of how they've changed. I think all those conversations, to me, have to be directed towards the people themselves, including even if we go to an idea of, all right, we need to create a new mascot. I think we should go to them for ideas. You know, what would you think it should look like? And likewise, in terms of what are you comfortable with in terms of language and things like that, so we can be most respectful of the process. That's what I envision, at least.
Yeah, and just for clarification, besides what's in the gym that's been there for a long time, that looks, everything else from the school is moved away, and it's now the circle M as
Correct.
the image that Millis uses on uniforms and all that. Can we confirm that? That's right. Okay.
Yeah, and there is some, there have been some, like some youth groups have a profile of the.
But those aren't affiliated with the school.
No.
Yeah.
They're
Other
probably,
than the same color, the school
Right.
colors and
Yeah.
things
But they're-
like that.
Yes,
Can I
Mr.
just
Carr.
also, one thing on the word Mohawk, I think it's also of note, there's a school in Western Mass, actually along the Mohawk Trail, Mohawk Trail Regional High School, who just went through this discussion. They were the Mohawk Trail, or whatever, their nickname was the Warriors, and they had the same Indian head mascot that we see in the gym. What that district decided to do was something along the lines of what Mr. Fallon's talking about, was they got rid of the logos. Their nickname was Warriors. They maintained the Warriors nickname. They kept the name Warriors, but they've gotten rid of the logo. I guess my question is, for me, the word Mohawk, or the Mohawks, that school is the Mohawk Trail School, and even though they had the discussion about the Native American imagery, there was no discussion about changing their name of their actual school. And there's actually also no, to my knowledge, and I actually looked it up today, there's no concerted effort to change the name of the Mohawk Trail or the Mohawk River or the various Mohawk avenues that are in the area of upstate New York that I grew up in. So I'm not sure. I think it lends itself to the word Mohawk in and of itself is not a widely deemed derogatory name, such as other names might be Redmen, Indians, Redskins, for example. So I think that, in my opinion, I think there's room there based on everything, both conversations Mr. Fallon's had, research as he just explained, and anecdotal evidence of what we've seen in terms of the word Mohawk in and of itself.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, so next steps. I think as a...
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Mr.
Dave.
Fallon. So we've learned a lot tonight. We've heard from, kind of two different groups. I think that we need to, as a district, go back and just really map out where we're going to go. So if we do go down the road of... So I think we can all agree that something needs to be done with the Native American imagery, but what that is and what that looks like, I think needs to be worked out, right, and how we're going to do that. I think that, if we go down the road of Mr. Fallon and the work that he's done with the Mohawk tribes, we're going to need a way to commit as a district to see this through, right? So we can't just We can't just say we're gonna do it. We need to, if we're gonna go down that road, we need a detailed plan with check-ins on how we're doing. And then we also still need to explore the other route. If there's two roads that we kind of need to map out this process. That route, and then if we're gonna, go through with, all right, let's start the process of renaming the mascot. What does that look like, and what steps do we need to go? So I think we have a few things to kind of organize and put together and put a clear process together, so we all know what the steps are, when we're going to talk about it, what we're going to do, what type of community involvement there's going to be. Does that sound like a good plan from the committee? Yes. Okay. So I think that we should commit to a date to have this discussion again. Let's see. So our next school committee meeting is set to be the 15th, and then we're not meeting again until January. Do we think that we can map this out before the 15th, or do you guys think that the January 5th meeting is more doable?
I think we can map it out.
Map it out by
And
the
so, should we have the separate discussion about the gym floor and the murals on the 15th? Meaning, can we move that forward, or do you want to keep it all together?
I'm open to what the committee thinks. We can,
I'm happy to talk about that as early as we would like, as far as
Yeah, I
imagery,
mean, I
as
think
far
we
as
could-
imagery is concerned.
Yes.
I'm prepared and happy to talk about that as soon as everybody feels comfortable.
so I think the first step in that is to identify and make sure that the gym is the only place that the school has that imagery, and I don't know if you all have done our homework for us already, or if we need to do that.
think it is.
The gym and websites, general banners, stuff like that. I would also argue that the Millis boosters should be involved in that conversation as well. They have a lot of gear and stuff. So specific imagery, especially that dream catcher, I would include that with the circle, not so bad, the dream catcher with the feathers, I would include in the imagery.
Okay, so I think we need to map that out so I think there's the boosters where we can certainly have, include them in the discussion and whatever
But the
we decide.
boosters are
They're
a
a
separate.
private
They are
they're a
separate organization, but we
can't
can,
tell them what to do.
sure, we can't, but we can include them in the conversation, right? But what we can affect change on is the school, the gym, any websites or anything that may have that, or I would be surprised
So
to think that
there-
the website had
There
it.
is no official website for the school that would have that logo or any logo. I do know that the Millis Hall of Fame organization has that logo. They are also a private organization that is not under our
Okay,
control. So, I mean, personally, I would, I think a request or a communication saying that, if the district is doing it, that they take that under consideration. But if they choose not to, I don't think that there is anything that we can.
no, I agree, but
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
as a
but
district, we can at
I'm
least
just,
put out a
just setting
communication.
expectations
Yep.
for everybody else. Like, there's only we have control of certain things, but the wider purview is not.
Yeah.
We can't decide for private organizations.
Okay, so I think we identify in the school if it's any further than the gym, and then it's the discussion, well, I think the walls are easy, those would be painted, but then the gym floor, what goes on the gym floor? Is it just the circle? So I think that's the discussion that we need to have.
Yeah.
So we can start that by just, confirming and options, and then, of course, the cost of what the cost implications are for that.
And then
Madam
maybe.
Chair,
Go ahead,
Ms.
Ms.
Gibbons.
Gibbons.
Just in relation to the lack of control that we have over private organizations, the only thing I think that we do have some control over is what happens inside the school as part of school programming. So sales of anything with the imagery on it, wearing of anything of the imagery on it, I think we do have control over, like, do we say you don't get to wear anything with that on it as part of so things that I just want us to consider as part of discussion,
That's fair.
which is what if any policies need to change and be updated? And what do we allow? So today, school resources are used for fundraising for boosters. They sell the gear in the schools, right? So if they choose to not adopt what this is, the change that we're making, I would just like us to consider what we might put in or adjust from a policy perspective to try to align our change of the imagery and maybe not allow them to sell things in the school if they're going to depict that imagery on it. Maybe the wearing is a little bit of like private.
No, I agree, and I think
teetering.
this may be an easy conversation, because if I'm trying to recall, because I know the boosters just put out their holiday sale, and I think they've moved just to the Circle M. So maybe there's some old stuff that they're selling off, but I know they've moved to the M. Some of the older stuff may still have the dream catcher on it, but I know the newer stuff, or I'm 90% sure the newer stuff is just the Circle M.
Yeah.
But, so it could be a very easy conversation with them.
Madam Chair, and if at
Mr.
all
Fallon.
possible, maybe Mr. Fallon can start to map out with Mr. Mulaney and Mr. Ardicki kind of what does a timeline look, right? Obviously, we're almost halfway through the year. So if we were going to adopt this curriculum or put it into the curriculum, is it a September 2021? Is it, I know there's part of it now, but if we did go with the formal adoption, what would that time frame look like? And what, if any, resources would be needed budgetary-wise, because that's the only control that we would have for the adoption. So I think it's kind of looking at both two trains going down the tracks and then just trying to figure out what does that look like.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Ms. Gibbons.
And I do think from a curriculum perspective that, so both groups that spoke tonight spoke about curriculum enhancements related to Indigenous peoples. So I think the curriculum discussion and the timeline that Mr. Carolano was referencing are applicable in both items that we're considering. So
Agreed.
we're going to need that regardless of what, to your point, like what road we travel down, we're going to need that. So that seems to be part of like the path forward in whichever way we go.
Okay. Anything else? So I think we've got some work to do.
We sure do.
Yes. So for
Good work. It's
What?
good work. It's
yes,
good work.
yeah, this is, yes. So for our December 15th meeting, we should have a good outline of what these paths look like and what our next steps are to choose the path and finalize that discussion.
So part of that would be just maybe Mr. Grant looking at all of the uniforms. I don't know if they're all pardon the pun, uniformed right now. I know that logos have been changing and names have been changing as we cycle through. So maybe if he could look at across all three levels, what are the uniforms, what's on them, whether they're symbols, whether they're names, any sort of kind of just an overview of what does
Just start
it
to take
look like.
inventory of
Correct.
what we have out there.
Yep.
Just off the top of my head, current uniforms, the ways tend to say Millis and home Mohawks.
Okay.
I think that's kind of the standard.
But if we could, that
I
would be
think
helpful.
so.
Yeah. I don't think we, one more part here, no.
I don't think we do.
uniform,
I don't think we do.
you know,
I think that imagery is in the gym,
Yep, yep.
and there may be a mat somewhere outside of the gym. or
Yes,
in the gym.
there is.
I think that's it.
There, the back door down the back hallway behind the gym. You are right. I think there might be two, inside and outside.
What do
And
you
the
think?
wall.
Good first step?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would also say we probably agree with Mr. Fallon 90%, and I'm really just happy to hear that there's a community voice here and people that are willing to take it on, and I would love it so much if you guys have involvement with the local Mohawk tribes. I think the only part that we're probably in contention with is the actual name Mohawk, and I think that's something that you guys have to research further and deliberate
Yep.
on. But I think it sounds like we're in agreement with the native imagery. It sounds like everyone wants to embrace some curriculum. I'm happy and excited to join that. Also fundraising, where these, Penn State for a while that we'd be happy to help fundraise for the gym floor. So we're really happy to be a part of the conversation. And I think those three pieces, I think the name is the only part that we might have a little bit more argument with.
Okay, well, we'll all do our research. All right.
Say there are two, both presentations were
Yes,
Yeah.
Yes.
yes, good
Agreed.
job. Thank you so much, and thank you again
Excellent job.
for making the drive up here. Okay, so that will conclude our mascot discussion for now. Any subcommittee reports? I don't think we have any old or new business. Do we need to have an executive session tonight?
There was something.
There's something in the folder, yes.
Okay, so then I will take a motion to adjourn to executive session.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I
Mr.
make a
Calano.
motion to adjourn to executive session for the purposes of contract negotiations for union and non-union personnel, not to return to open session.
Second,
So moved and seconded. This requires a roll call vote. Robin Briggs?
Yes.
Mark Conroy?
Yes.
I'm a yes. Stephen Catalano?
Yes.
Denise Gibbons?
yes,
We are adjourned. Thank you.
thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
It's the MOA.